Bro, I just found out there's an island in Brazil so packed with venomous snakes that the Brazilian Navy literally said, "Nope, not our problem," and made it illegal to visit. And that's not even the weirdest one on this list. We've got a lake that'll kill you just from standing next to it, a cave sealed for 5 million years with creatures science can't explain, and a US government facility so classified that your own congressman can't get in. Like, bro, your elected guy can't even go there. If your jaw isn't on the floor by 86, I will personally eat my script. Hit that like button, subscribe, and smash the notification bell, because if this video doesn't blow up, the government wins, and we simply cannot let that happen. 1. North Sentinel Island sounds like a paradise vacation spot until you realize the locals have been violently rejecting every visitor for over 60,000 years, and they are incredibly good at it. The Indian government itself is legally banned from setting foot there after the tribe killed a missionary in 2018 with arrows before he even finished unpacking his Bible. These people have zero interest in pizza delivery, Netflix, or literally anything humans invented after the Stone Age. 2. Snake Island off the coast of Brazil sounds like a challenge until scientists tell you there is one golden lancehead pit viper for every single square meter of land, and their venom literally dissolves human flesh within hours of a bite. The Brazilian Navy does not allow any civilians anywhere near this island, and honestly, that is the most reasonable government decision in the entire history of South America. Even the lighthouse keeper stationed there reportedly died after snakes got inside his house. 3. Zone Rouge in France sounds like a cute name for a fancy wine region until you find out it has been completely quarantined since World War I ended over 100 years ago. The soil is so packed with arsenic, chlorine gas residue, and actual human remains from millions of soldiers that the French government permanently banned all farming, building, and human activity there by law. Plants still grow deformed. Animals die unexpectedly. France just fenced it off and collectively agreed to never speak about it at dinner. 4. Dulce Base in New Mexico is a classified underground facility so secretive that even elected members of Congress get turned away at the gate with zero explanation and zero apology. Workers who somehow get hired must sign contracts legally stripping away their right to ever discuss anything they saw, heard, or smelled underground for the rest of their natural lives. Nobody knows exactly how many floors go down or what happens inside. The US government has never confirmed its full purpose and probably never will. 5. Vozrojdeniya Island, sitting in the middle of the Aral Sea, was where the Soviet Union casually dumped tons of weaponized anthrax like it was old furniture nobody wanted anymore. Then the sea started drying up because of Soviet irrigation projects, and the island slowly connected to the mainland. Those anthrax spores did not stay put. They started blowing freely across the entire region, carried by wind like the world's worst gift nobody ordered. Scientists in hazmat suits visited once and left extremely quickly. 6. Room 641A inside an AT&T building in San Francisco looks completely ordinary from the outside, which was entirely the point. A whistleblower technician named Mark Klein discovered the NSA had secretly built a room inside this telecom hub that was intercepting and copying every single American phone call and email passing through the network. Not some calls, every call, every email. The room existed for years before anyone outside the program knew it was there, silently collecting the entire private conversations of millions of Americans. 7. The Chapel of the Ark in Aksum, Ethiopia, claims to hold the actual original Ark of the Covenant from the Bible, and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church takes this claim with complete seriousness. One single guardian monk is allowed inside, and that monk never leaves the compound for his entire life once appointed. No cameras, no visitors, no exceptions for anyone including government officials or foreign dignitaries. When the monk dies, another is immediately appointed. The outside world has never been given any independent verification of what is actually stored in there. 8. Challenger Deep. At the bottom of the Mariana Trench sits nearly 7 miles below the ocean surface, where the water pressure is so extreme it would crush a submarine like an empty soda can in seconds. More humans have physically walked on the surface of the moon than have ever reached this specific point on Earth, which says a lot about how much easier it apparently is to leave the planet entirely than to visit its own ocean floor. The creatures living down there have never seen sunlight once in their entire existence. 9. The Vatican's secret archives sounds like the title of a thriller movie, but it is a completely real place containing 53 miles of shelving packed with documents the public has essentially never seen. Stored inside are personal letters from Michelangelo, Adolf Hitler's formal request for a marriage annulment, and the complete trial records of Galileo when the church put him under house arrest for suggesting Earth moves around the sun. Researchers must apply years in advance for access, and even then only see specific pre-approved documents in a supervised reading room. 10. Surtsey Island erupted dramatically from the ocean floor. Off Iceland in 1963, and scientists immediately treated it like the most valuable laboratory on Earth because it literally was. They banned all human visitors immediately to observe how life colonizes a brand new piece of land completely untouched by human interference. In over 60 years, only a small handful of specially selected researchers have ever been permitted to land there. Every plant, bird, and insect that arrived did so completely on its own without any human help, making it scientifically irreplaceable. 11. Jiangsu National Security Education Museum in China is a real spy museum that sounds like the coolest field trip destination on Earth, until you find out foreigners are completely and permanently banned from entering under any circumstances. The exhibits inside include actual disguise kits used by real agents, invisible ink systems, and genuine classified dossiers from operations that apparently still matter enough to hide from outside eyes. China built an entire museum celebrating espionage, and then decided the rest of the world absolutely cannot come see it. The irony is spectacular. 12. Hanford site in Washington state produced the plutonium that went inside the atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki, and then spent the following decades becoming the single most radioactively contaminated location in the entire Western Hemisphere. 56 million gallons of nuclear waste sit in underground tanks that are actively leaking into the Columbia River right now, while cleanup crews work in full protective gear daily. The project to clean it up has already cost billions of dollars, and engineers openly admit they still have no complete solution for the worst of it. 13. Plum Island Animal Disease Center sits off the coast of New York, where the United States government quietly studies the most contagious and devastating livestock diseases known to exist on the planet. Journalists who approached too close by boat were immediately intercepted and turned back by Coast Guard vessels without explanation or apology. The facility studies things like foot and mouth disease, which could theoretically devastate the entire American agricultural economy if it ever escaped the island. Congress has tried multiple times to investigate and received carefully worded responses that answered essentially nothing. 14. Mezhgory is a closed Russian town in the Ural Mountains where residents live and work on a classified government project that Moscow has never publicly named or described to anyone outside the program. Satellite images from Western intelligence agencies clearly show massive tunnel excavation projects stretching deep into the surrounding mountains on a scale that would require thousands of workers and enormous resources. Russia has been asked about it repeatedly by foreign governments and journalists alike. Every single time Russia responds with complete silence or a subject change of breathtaking confidence. 15. Unit 731 was Japan's biological warfare research program during World War II, operating out of a compound in China where scientists conducted live experiments on thousands of human prisoners in ways too disturbing to fully describe in polite conversation. When the war ended, American intelligence made a secret deal granting every Unit 731 scientist complete immunity from war crimes prosecution, in exchange for receiving all the experimental data they had collected. The United States government classified this arrangement for decades, and the scientists went on to live comfortable post-war lives in Japan. 16. Lake Karachay in Russia earned the distinction of being the most polluted body of water on the entire planet after the Soviet Union spent decades using it as a casual dumping ground for nuclear waste from nearby weapons facilities. Standing on the shore for just one single hour delivers a radiation dose large enough to kill a person. Soviet authorities eventually decided the best solution was to slowly fill the entire lake with concrete and hollow cement blocks to stop radioactive sediment from spreading further. It is essentially a nuclear waste grave pretending to be a lake. 17. The Kaaba in Mecca is Islam's holiest site, and non-Muslims are banned not just from entering the building itself but from entering the entire city of Mecca under Saudi Arabian law. The interior of the Kaaba has been entered by fewer than a dozen non-Muslims in all of recorded modern history, and those visits happened under extraordinary and often controversial circumstances. The inside is described as a simple marble room with inscriptions and hanging lamps, but no photographs taken by outsiders have ever been publicly verified as authentic. It remains one of the most genuinely unseen interiors on Earth. 18. The Jicarilla Apache Nation in New Mexico protects sacred mountain sites so seriously that outsiders who enter without tribal permission face actual federal trespass charges with zero warnings given beforehand. The tribe has deliberately never published or publicly mapped the boundaries of their restricted sacred lands, which means an outsider cannot even claim they wandered in accidentally. These sites have been used for ceremonies stretching back centuries, and the tribe has made it abundantly clear that outside curiosity does not override thousands of years of protected spiritual tradition. The federal government fully backs their authority to keep everyone out permanently. 19. Pine Gap sits in the remote Australian desert outside Alice Springs, operating as a joint American and Australian intelligence facility that tracks satellites and guides military drone strikes across multiple continents in real time. Australian citizens are legally prosecuted for simply photographing the facility's exterior from public roads nearby, which is a remarkable level of secrecy for a building inside a democracy. The facility played a direct role in targeting decisions during conflicts in the Middle East for decades. Most Australians driving past it on the highway have no idea what actually happens inside those white radome domes. 20. Trinity Site in New Mexico is where American scientists detonated the world's very first atomic bomb on July 16, 1945, and the heat from the explosion was so intense it melted the desert sand into a brand new radioactive glass that had never previously existed in nature. Scientists named it Trinitite, and it glows faintly green. The site is still mildly radioactive today, and the U.S. government opens it to the public exactly twice per year for a few hours at a time. Visitors are officially told the radiation exposure during a short visit is considered acceptable, which is a sentence nobody ever wants to hear. 21. In 1989, workers at a primate research facility in Reston, Virginia, noticed the monkeys were dying in unusually large numbers and called in a disease specialist who made a discovery that caused immediate quiet panic among everyone involved. The monkeys had Ebola. Inside a suburban American office park, the strain turned out to be aerosolized, meaning it was spreading through the air between rooms, which is every virologist's absolute nightmare scenario. The only reason it did not become an American catastrophe is that this particular strain was lethal to monkeys, but somehow did not kill humans. That time. 22. Bohemian Grove is a private campground in California where some of the most powerful men in American history, including multiple sitting presidents, Fortune 500 CEOs, and military generals, gather every single July for 2 weeks of activities the public is never supposed to know about. Investigative journalist Alex Jones snuck inside in 2000 and filmed what appeared to be a mock human sacrifice ritual performed in front of a giant stone owl on opening night. The club has never denied the ceremony exists. They just insist it is theater. Very exclusive, very secret, very strange theater performed by the most powerful people alive. 23. Poveglia Island sits in the Venice Lagoon in Italy, looking absolutely beautiful from the water, which is deeply misleading given that it served as a mass dumping ground for plague victims in 1348, and again during later outbreaks with an estimated 50,000 bodies buried in its soil. It later became a mental asylum where a doctor reportedly conducted unauthorized experiments on patients before allegedly jumping from the bell tower. The Italian government has repeatedly refused to sell the island to private developers despite multiple generous offers. It currently sits completely abandoned, and the government seems perfectly content leaving it that way forever. 24. Movil Cave in Romania was completely sealed from the outside world for 5.5 million years until scientists accidentally broke through in 1986 and discovered something that genuinely should not exist according to everything biology previously understood. Inside was a fully functioning ecosystem of 33 species found absolutely nowhere else on Earth, Surviving in total darkness, with zero sunlight and breathing toxic hydrogen sulfide gas that would kill a surface animal within minutes. The cave has its own food chain built entirely on chemosynthetic bacteria. Scientists enter wearing gas masks and emerge looking deeply unsettled every single time. 25. Mount Athos in Greece is a self-governing monastic peninsula that has maintained a complete ban on women entering its territory for over 1,000 years, making it one of the longest continuously enforced gender restrictions in human history. The ban applies not just to human women, but to female animals of any species living anywhere on the entire peninsula. The European Union has repeatedly pressured Greece to end the policy, and Greece has repeatedly responded by doing absolutely nothing different. Monks have lived there in uninterrupted isolation since the 9th century, and have made it abundantly clear they intend to continue doing exactly that. 26. Lac Sal in Djibouti is a crater lake so extraordinarily hostile to life that anything submerged in its waters begins mummifying almost immediately due to extreme salt saturation combined with acidity levels that corrode metal equipment within hours of exposure. The shoreline constantly releases chlorine fumes strong enough to damage the lungs of anyone standing nearby without respiratory protection. It sits over 500 feet below sea level, making it the lowest point in Africa and one of the hottest places on the planet. Scientists visit briefly in protective gear, collect whatever samples they can, and leave as fast as professionally possible. 27. Diego Garcia is a tiny island in the Indian Ocean, housing a massive American military base whose original native population, the Chagosians, were secretly and forcibly removed by British authorities between 1968 and 1973, and relocated to Mauritius with essentially no compensation and no explanation whatsoever. British and American courts have repeatedly ruled in favor of allowing the Chagosians to return to their homeland. Both governments have repeatedly ignored those rulings while continuing to operate the base completely normally. The displaced population and their descendants have been fighting legal battles for over 50 years, and as of today, they still cannot go home. 28. Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands was used by the United States military as a nuclear testing ground between 1946 and 1958, during which they detonated 23 separate nuclear bombs above, on and below the island and surrounding waters. The original residents were relocated and promised they could return after testing concluded. They eventually came back, ate local food, and then scientists discovered the coconuts and fish were still radioactive enough to cause serious health damage, forcing a second permanent evacuation. The United States government paid compensation eventually. The island remains too contaminated to permanently inhabit to this day. 29. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault is buried 400 feet inside a frozen Arctic mountain in Norway, designed as humanity's agricultural insurance policy, containing backup copies of nearly every food crop seed variety on Earth in case civilization experiences a catastrophic collapse. Access is so tightly controlled that even the countries who deposited their own seeds inside cannot freely enter and retrieve them without going through a formal international request process. Only one withdrawal has ever been made in the vault's entire history, when Syrian researchers requested their seeds after their home gene bank was destroyed during the Civil War. 30. Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Colorado is a military command bunker carved directly inside a granite mountain, where the entire facility sits on 15-ton steel springs, designed to absorb the shockwave from a nearby nuclear detonation and keep everything inside fully operational afterward. It was built during the Cold War specifically to ensure American military command could continue functioning even after nuclear weapons had ended surface life above it. NORAD operates continuously from inside this mountain, monitoring all North American airspace. The engineers who designed it essentially built a fully functioning military headquarters intended for use after civilization itself has already ended. 31. Woomera Prohibited Area in South Australia is larger than the entire country of England and serves as the biggest land-based weapons testing range on the planet, where missiles, drones, and classified defense systems have been tested continuously since the 1940s. This includes the period when Britain detonated actual nuclear weapons there without fully informing the Australian public about radioactive fallout affecting nearby Aboriginal communities who had no idea what was happening above their land. The range remains fully active today, and signs on the perimeter make it extremely clear that entering without authorization is a serious federal crime. 32. Dalal in Ethiopia holds the record as the hottest permanently inhabited place on Earth, where surface temperatures regularly exceed 140 degrees Fahrenheit, and the ground bubbles with acid pools releasing toxic chlorine and sulfur gases that make breathing without protection genuinely dangerous within minutes. The landscape looks like an alien planet with neon yellow and green mineral formations surrounding pools of liquid acid so corrosive they dissolve metal equipment left behind by visiting scientists. Researchers who studied Dalal do so in extremely short supervised visits with full protective gear and a very clear exit plan. 33. Ice Grand Shrine in Japan has been completely rebuilt from scratch every single 20 years since 690 AD using the exact same ancient architectural design, each time making it simultaneously one of the oldest and newest structures on Earth. Only members of the imperial family and specially appointed Shinto priests are permitted to enter the innermost sanctuary under any circumstances whatsoever. The interior has never been photographed, never been described in detail by anyone permitted inside, and no public record of its contents has ever been officially released. It has been successfully kept completely secret for over 1,300 years. 34. Lake Vostok in Antarctica is a liquid freshwater lake the size of Lake Ontario, buried under 2.5 miles of solid Antarctic ice, completely isolated from all surface life for approximately 15 million years. Russian scientists spent decades drilling through the ice to reach it, and when they finally broke through in 2012 and retrieved water samples, they found microbial life forms that did not match any previously classified organism in any scientific database anywhere on Earth. The scientific community is still actively debating what exactly was found and what it genuinely means for understanding where life can exist. 35. Area 51 in Nevada was officially acknowledged by the CIA for the very first time only in 2013, when declassified documents confirmed it was used to develop the U-2 spy plane program during the Cold War. The acknowledgement was celebrated as government transparency until people realized the CIA simultaneously confirmed that dozens of other classified programs conducted at the same facility remained completely unexplained and would continue to stay that way indefinitely. Confirming one secret while protecting 20 others is a remarkably efficient way to appear cooperative while changing absolutely nothing about actual government secrecy on the ground. 36. Mailu Su in Kyrgyzstan is a former Soviet uranium mining town sitting directly above 36 separate radioactive waste dumps containing millions of cubic meters of uranium tailings from decades of weapons program mining operations. Geologists studying the region have concluded that a single major earthquake along nearby fault lines could send an enormous radioactive mudslide directly into the Fergana Valley River system, which supplies drinking water to approximately 5 million people across Central Asia. Those dumps sit there right now inadequately secured in one of the most seismically active regions on the entire continent. 37. Beneath Kansas City, Missouri, exist 55 million square feet of Cold War-era underground tunnels carved into natural limestone formations that the federal government quietly converted into storage facilities for classified documents, emergency stockpiles, and national continuity records. The tunnels maintain a naturally constant temperature and humidity, making them ideal for preserving sensitive materials indefinitely. Various government agencies store materials down there whose full contents have never been publicly cataloged or acknowledged in any official capacity. Kansas City residents drive above it every single day, with essentially no idea an entire underground government city exists beneath their feet. 38. Granite Mountain Records Vault. Outside Salt Lake City, Utah, is a massive underground archive carved deep into a mountain by the Mormon Church containing genealogical and baptism records for essentially every person ever formally registered with the church, going back centuries and spanning the entire globe. The vault was built to survive a nuclear war, and its contents are protected by enormous steel vault doors. Access is restricted even to the majority of active church members, and the complete inventory of what is stored inside has never been fully disclosed to the public under any circumstances. 39. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary's D-Block Isolation Unit in San Francisco Bay was where the prison's most difficult inmates were placed in complete sensory darkness for days or weeks at a time as punishment. One prisoner held in isolation reportedly told guards he had been visited during the night by a creature with glowing eyes that attacked him inside his locked cell. Guards dismissed the claim completely. The following morning, that same prisoner was found dead under circumstances the official prison report described only as undetermined. The cell block is now a tourist attraction, and visitors consistently report feeling deeply uncomfortable standing inside it. 40. Mariana Trench hydrothermal vents were discovered in 1977 and immediately forced scientists to completely rewrite the foundational rules of biology, because creatures living around them survived with absolutely zero sunlight using chemosynthesis, converting toxic chemicals into energy instead of using photosynthesis like every other food chain on Earth. Before this discovery, scientists believed sunlight was a non-negotiable requirement for any ecosystem to function anywhere. The discovery opened serious scientific debate about whether life could exist on moons like Europa, which have no sunlight but possess liquid water and active chemical systems beneath their frozen surfaces. 41. Shugborough Hall in England has a stone monument in its garden inscribed with a sequence of letters that has resisted decoding for 250 years, despite serious attempts by some of the most qualified code breakers in history. The NSA formally attempted to crack it. CIA analysts examined it. The legendary code breakers of Bletchley Park, who cracked Nazi Enigma codes during World War II, officially studied it and produced nothing conclusive. Some researchers believe it encodes the location of the Holy Grail. Others believe it is simply a memorial with no hidden meaning. Nobody actually knows, and that drives everyone absolutely insane. 42. Queen Maud Land is a Norwegian-claimed territory in Antarctica, larger than the entire country of Mexico, that has never been fully explored by any scientific expedition in human history. The terrain is so extreme and access so logistically complicated that even experienced geologists must submit applications years in advance, just for a chance at one of the extremely rare access permits issued annually. Vast mountain ranges, valleys, and geological formations sitting inside this territory have never been seen by human eyes, and have no names on any map currently in existence anywhere in the world. 43. Drug-resistant tuberculosis. Prison wards in Siberia. House inmates carrying strains of tuberculosis so completely resistant to every available antibiotic that medical authorities have essentially no effective treatment options remaining for the infected patients. Guards working these specific prison wings wear full hazmat protective equipment during every single shift because the risk of transmission is considered extreme, even with maximum precautions in place. All outside visitors are permanently banned without any exceptions regardless of circumstance. Scientists studying these strains describe them as a serious preview of what happens when humanity runs out of antibiotics entirely. 44. Onkalo Nuclear Repository in Finland is humanity's first serious attempt to permanently store radioactive nuclear waste safely, and the engineers designing it had to solve a problem that no human civilization has ever faced before. The waste stored inside will remain lethally radioactive for 100,000 years, which is longer than modern humans have existed as a species. The designers had to create warning systems that would still communicate danger to whatever beings exist 10,000 generations from now, when every current human language will almost certainly be completely extinct and unreadable. 45. The CDC's BSL-4 laboratory in Atlanta, Georgia, is the only facility in the United States legally authorized to store live samples of smallpox, a disease the entire world celebrated eradicating in 1980 after one of history's greatest public health achievements. Researchers working with live smallpox samples inside this laboratory wear fully pressurized protective suits that are physically tethered by air hoses to the ceiling at all times to prevent any accidental contamination event. The existence of live smallpox samples anywhere on Earth remains one of the most quietly controversial decisions in modern scientific policy. 46. Yamantau Mountain in Russia's Ural Range contains a classified underground facility so enormous and so secretive that American intelligence agencies spent the better part of 3 decades attempting to determine what it was actually built for without ever reaching a definitive conclusion. Construction involved thousands of workers and continued for years after the Cold War officially ended, which struck Western analysts as particularly strange given the timing. Russia has been formally asked about Yamantau multiple times through diplomatic channels by the United States government. Every single inquiry has been met with complete silence or an answer so vague it contained no useful information whatsoever. 47. Jiangsu Imperial Archives in China holds original Qing Dynasty government records and documents dating back 400 years, covering one of history's most consequential imperial administrations in extraordinary bureaucratic detail. Foreign researchers are denied access completely regardless of academic credentials or institutional affiliation. Even Chinese scholars who are citizens of the country that owns the archive must navigate an extraordinary government clearance process that takes years and succeeds only rarely. The full scope of what historical knowledge sits inside those archives completely unexamined by the outside academic world is genuinely impossible to calculate. 48. Darvaza gas crater in Turkmenistan came to exist in 1971, when Soviet geologists drilling for natural gas accidentally collapsed the ground into an underground cavern and decided the safest solution was to simply light the escaping gas on fire, expecting it to burn itself out within a few days at most. It has now been burning continuously for over 50 years, with absolutely no indication it intends to stop anytime soon. The Turkmenistan government has periodically announced plans to extinguish it for environmental reasons, and has so far done nothing effective. Locals simply call it the door to hell, which feels entirely accurate. 49. Hopi tribe sacred Kiva ceremonies in Arizona take place in underground ceremonial chambers that have been used for initiation rituals stretching back centuries before European contact with North America. Outsiders who have somehow witnessed these ceremonies without permission have historically faced permanent exile from all tribal lands and complete severance from any relationships within the community. The ceremonies themselves have never been documented or described by any authorized outside observer in writing. The Hopi nation maintains that the specific content of these rituals belongs exclusively to the tribe, and sharing them with outsiders would cause genuine spiritual harm to the entire community. 50. Yellowstone. Supervolcano sitting beneath Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming is one of the largest active volcanic systems on Earth, and geologists monitoring it record approximately 3,000 separate earthquakes occurring beneath the surface every single year. The USGS maintains a classified emergency response protocol that gets quietly activated when specific eruption indicator measurements cross predetermined critical thresholds. A full Yellowstone eruption would blanket most of North America in ash and trigger a volcanic winter affecting global food supplies for years. Millions of tourists visit the park annually to photograph geysers while standing directly on top of all of this. 51. Tinian Island's bomb pit in the Mariana Islands is a concrete-lined loading pit still sitting exactly where it was in 1945, when American military crews used it to lower the atomic bombs Little Boy and Fat Man up into the belly of the Enola Gay before those planes took off toward Japan. The pit is sealed today, and the exact assembly procedures used during those final hours remain partially classified decades after the war ended. Tourists occasionally visit the island and stand next to this unremarkable-looking concrete hole in the ground without fully processing what was loaded out of it. 52. Chernobyl reactor. Four's elephant's foot is a massive blob of melted nuclear fuel mixed with concrete and sand that formed in the basement of the destroyed reactor during the 1986 disaster, and it remains one of the most dangerous objects that has ever existed on Earth. Exposure to its radiation for just 300 seconds delivers a lethal dose to any human being standing nearby. Workers who photographed it in the early aftermath did so by rolling a camera on a wheel into the room on a string, because direct presence was instant death. Its radioactivity will not drop to genuinely safe levels until approximately the year 2065. 53. Kasanka National Park in Zambia hosts the single largest mammal migration on Earth when approximately 10 million straw-colored fruit bats descend on a small patch of forest every November, in numbers so dense they block out the sky above the tree canopy. The caves where these bats roost accumulate guano gases including ammonia and carbon dioxide at concentrations so dangerous that any human entering without respiratory equipment loses consciousness within minutes and dies shortly after. Park rangers who monitor the migration do so strictly from outside the cave entrances and consider any entry during roosting season completely out of the question. 54. Iron Mountain. Underground facility in Pennsylvania is carved into a former limestone mine and serves as the storage location for some of the most irreplaceable physical media in human history, including original photo negatives of iconic historical images and master recordings of music that exists in no other format anywhere on Earth. Access to the facility requires armed security escort at every stage of entry and movement inside. The specific inventory of what is preserved there is not fully public, but the facility's clients include major museums, record labels, and government agencies who consider the contents genuinely impossible to replace if lost. 55. Library of Congress. Restricted collections in Washington, D.C. contains materials that the American public will likely never be permitted to access, including documents seized directly from Nazi archives after World War II, physical evidence files from landmark criminal cases, and materials from obscenity prosecutions that fundamentally shaped American constitutional law. The existence of these collections is acknowledged, but their specific contents are not cataloged in any public finding aid. Researchers who have spent careers studying adjacent topics sometimes discover references to documents in these restricted holdings that they are then formally denied permission to examine. 56. Lake Nyos in Cameroon is a volcanic crater lake that on the night of August 21, 1986, spontaneously released an enormous invisible cloud of carbon dioxide from dissolved gas that had been accumulating in its depths for years. The cloud was heavier than air and rolled silently across the surrounding landscape, traveling 15 miles and suffocating 1,700 people, along with every single animal in its path within minutes. Survivors described hearing a rumbling sound and then waking up hours later surrounded by bodies with no memory of losing consciousness. The lake still sits there, with dissolved gas continuing to accumulate in its depths. 57. The Freemasons' Grand Lodge Archive. In London houses ritual documents, initiation records, and organizational histories dating back to the early 1700s when the modern fraternal order was formally established in England and began spreading across the world. Gaining entry to these archives requires not simply being a Freemason, but having ascended through a multi-decade progression of internal lodge ranks that most members never complete in their entire lifetime of membership. The archive exists. Its general existence is acknowledged, and almost nobody who is not already deep inside the organization's hierarchy will ever be permitted to examine what it actually contains. 58. Palmyra Atoll is an uninhabited United States territory in the Pacific Ocean that looks like a postcard paradise of white sand and turquoise water, and has a documented history of making very bad things happen to people who visit it without authorization. Two sailors named Mac and Muff Graham anchored there illegally in 1974 and were murdered by another couple who had also anchored illegally nearby. The case went unsolved for 27 years before a conviction was finally secured. Multiple other unexplained disappearances and deaths have been associated with the atoll over the decades, and the Fish and Wildlife Service strictly controls all access. 59. White Sands. Missile Range in New Mexico is the largest military installation in the entire United States, covering an area larger than the state of Delaware, where the American military tests weapon systems, missiles, and classified defense technologies on a continuous basis. When a scheduled test requires the airspace and surrounding area to be completely clear, the authorities simply close the interstate highway that runs through the range without advance public notice and without providing any explanation to drivers who find the road suddenly blocked by military personnel. Sometimes the closure lasts hours, sometimes it lasts days. No further information is offered. 60. The 1979 Sverdlovsk anthrax leak in Russia's Ural region happened when a bioweapons facility accidentally left an exhaust filter off its ventilation system, releasing weaponized anthrax spores into the surrounding city air and killing 64 confirmed civilians in the days that followed. The Soviet Union immediately launched an aggressive cover story blaming the outbreak on contaminated black market meat and maintained that lie through diplomatic channels with complete confidence for over a decade. Western intelligence suspected the truth almost immediately. The USSR denied it until 1992 when Boris Yeltsin finally admitted what had actually happened 13 years earlier. 61. The Amber Room was a complete interior chamber decorated entirely with intricately carved amber panels, gold leaf, and precious stones originally built in Prussia and later given to Russian Tsar Peter the Great as a diplomatic gift. Nazi German forces dismantled the entire room panel by panel during World War II and shipped everything east where it vanished completely and has never been recovered despite decades of searching by multiple governments and private treasure hunters. The current estimated value sits around $500 million. Every few years, someone announces a promising lead. Every single time that lead goes absolutely nowhere. 62. Camp 22 in North Korea is a political prison camp where the government imprisons not just individuals accused of disloyalty, but their entire extended families, including children and grandparents, who have committed no offense whatsoever under a policy called guilt by association. Defectors who survived imprisonment there have provided testimony describing underground tunnel networks where chemical agents were allegedly tested directly on prisoner populations as a matter of routine state policy. The North Korean government denies the camp exists. Satellite imagery shows a large enclosed facility exactly where defectors say it is located with no explanation offered. 63. The Black Vault is a civilian-run archive founded by researcher John Greenewald, who spent years submitting Freedom of Information Act requests to American government agencies and eventually accumulated over 2 million declassified documents covering programs so bizarre and so far outside normal government activity that multiple agencies went back and retroactively reclassified documents they had already officially released. The government essentially looked at what it had accidentally handed over, realized the mistake, and attempted to take it back after the fact. Some of those documents had already been copied and distributed widely enough that the reclassification effort accomplished very little practically speaking. 64. Sundung Cave in Vietnam is the largest cave on Earth by volume, discovered in 1991 by a local farmer named Ho Khan, who stumbled across the entrance in the jungle and then spent 15 years trying to find it again, after initially losing track of its location. Inside the cave exists a complete independent weather system, a jungle with trees growing toward a hole in the ceiling and a river running through its floor. The Vietnamese government strictly limits entry to 1,000 total visitors per year to prevent ecosystem damage. A single visit costs thousands of dollars and requires months of advance booking. 65. Skull and Bones is Yale University's most secretive senior society, operating out of a windowless stone building on campus called The Tomb, that has never been entered by any non-member under any recorded circumstance in its nearly 200-year history. The society has counted among its members multiple United States presidents, CIA directors, and Supreme Court justices. The club itself has publicly claimed the building contains artifacts including the skull and bones of Apache leader Geronimo, allegedly dug up by Prescott Bush during World War I. Geronimo's descendants have formally requested their ancestors' remains be returned and have received no meaningful response. 66. Lop Nur is a dried salt lake in China's Taklamakan Desert, where the Chinese government detonated 45 nuclear weapons above ground between 1964 and 1996, in a test program that continued for decades while the surrounding region remained populated by Uyghur communities who were never officially warned about the tests, never evacuated before detonations, and never informed about radiation exposure risks afterward. Chinese government documents acknowledging the program exist, but detailed health impact studies on affected populations have never been made publicly available. Independent researchers attempting to study health outcomes in the region have consistently been denied access. 67. RAF. Menwith Hill in Yorkshire. England is a British military base covered in dozens of enormous white dome structures called radomes that house satellite communication interception equipment capable of monitoring the majority of European satellite traffic passing overhead at any given moment. The facility operates as a joint British and American intelligence installation, and its capabilities were partially revealed through documents leaked by Edward Snowden in 2013. Members of the British Parliament themselves have been formally denied entry to the base when requesting inspection visits, which is a remarkable situation given that Parliament theoretically oversees British intelligence activities. 68. Rocky Flats Plant. Outside Denver, Colorado, manufactured nuclear weapons components for decades, and in 1969 suffered a serious plutonium fire that released radioactive contamination over surrounding suburban neighborhoods without any public announcement or evacuation order being issued to residents living nearby. The facility was eventually shut down following an FBI raid in 1989 and a $7 billion cleanup operation that took years to complete. The site was then converted into a wildlife refuge, which sounds reassuring until you discover the refuge contains no radiation warning signs along its public walking trails, despite documented residual contamination remaining in the soil. 69. The Kawahiva tribe in the Brazilian Amazon is one of the last completely uncontacted indigenous groups remaining on Earth, and they have survived largely because illegal loggers and land grabbers have been hunting them for decades, forcing them into constant movement through increasingly shrinking forest territory. The Brazilian government established a specialized covert monitoring agency called FUNAI, specifically to track the tribe's movements from the air using aircraft and protect their territory without making any direct contact. Footage of the tribe moving through the forest has been captured from aircraft. Their population is believed to be dangerously small, and their survival is considered genuinely uncertain. 70. Fort Detrick in Frederick, Maryland is publicly known as a major American biodefense research facility, but beyond its acknowledged laboratories exists a classified biological sample archive, so sensitive that even the basic catalog describing what samples are stored inside has never been publicly acknowledged to exist in any official government document. The known history of Fort Detrick already includes decades of offensive biological weapons research conducted before the United States signed the Biological Weapons Convention in 1972. What was retained afterward, what was preserved, and what sits in cold storage today remains one of the more consequential unanswered questions in American military history. 71. Fort Knox. Gold Vault in Kentucky is supposedly home to the majority of the United States gold reserves and has not been publicly audited or independently inspected since 1974, when Gerald Ford was president and disco was considered acceptable music. Congress has repeatedly requested access to verify the gold is actually there, and has been refused every single time without any satisfying explanation from the Treasury Department. No journalist, no independent auditor, and no elected official outside a tiny circle has physically seen inside since then. The United States government asks the public to simply trust that everything is fine in there. 72. Turkana Basin in northern Kenya has produced some of the most significant hominid fossil discoveries in history, including skulls and skeletal remains that have repeatedly forced scientists to redraw the timeline of human evolution going back 3 million years. The majority of the basin is restricted to outside visitors, specifically to prevent irreplaceable fossils from being accidentally destroyed by foot traffic, before scientists have the opportunity to properly excavate and document them. Fossils here are so densely concentrated and so scientifically significant that researchers describe walking carefully across the landscape to avoid stepping on pieces of human prehistory lying on the surface. 73. Potala Palace in Lhasa. Tibet contains underground chambers that were sealed by Chinese government authorities following the annexation of Tibet in the 1950s and have remained sealed ever since, with no public inventory of their contents ever produced or released. The palace served as the winter residence of the Dalai Lama for centuries and housed centuries' worth of religious artifacts, manuscripts, and treasures accumulated by successive Tibetan Buddhist administrations. What exactly was sealed inside those underground rooms, what condition it is in today, and whether anything has been removed or destroyed, remains completely unknown to the outside world. 74. Aldabra Atoll in the Seychelles is a UNESCO World Heritage Site containing the largest population of giant tortoises on Earth, along with ecosystems so pristine and so ecologically significant that the Seychelles Island Foundation requires researchers to submit applications 2 full years in advance, just for consideration of a supervised scientific visit. The atoll was spared from development largely because its extremely remote location made it logistically impractical to exploit commercially. It represents one of the last large-scale coral atoll ecosystems on Earth that has never been significantly altered by human activity, and scientists intend to keep it that way. 75. HARP facility in Alaska is a research installation capable of beaming 3.6 megawatts of radio frequency energy directly into the ionosphere and was for years the subject of intense conspiracy theories blaming it for triggering earthquakes, controlling weather patterns, and conducting mind control experiments on civilian populations across multiple continents. The facility was partially declassified and transferred from military to university control in 2015 when officials confirmed it was an atmospheric research antenna, studying how the ionosphere responds to radio energy. This explanation satisfied approximately nobody who had already decided it was a superweapon, and the conspiracy theories continue enthusiastically to this day. 76. Runit Dome on Eniwetok Atoll in the Marshall Islands is a concrete dome structure built by the United States military to contain radioactive soil and debris, collected from 43 separate nuclear bomb tests conducted on the atoll between 1948 and 1958. The dome is visibly cracking, and the Marshall Islands government has repeatedly warned that rising sea levels combined with structural deterioration will eventually allow radioactive material to leach directly into the surrounding Pacific Ocean. The United States government has responded to these warnings by clarifying that the dome is technically the Marshall Islands government's legal responsibility despite the fact that America built it and filled it. 77. Sulawesi's lore. Lindu Reserve in Indonesia harbors species so extraordinarily rare that scientific teams have deployed camera traps in the forest for years at a time, before capturing a single photograph of certain animals that are known to exist there only through occasional indirect evidence. The ecosystem inside the reserve took thousands of years to reach its current state of complexity, and scientists studying it have determined that even brief human intrusion into certain zones triggers cascading ecological disruptions that can take decades to stabilize. Access is restricted not because of government secrecy, but because human presence itself causes measurable, irreversible damage. 78. The Situation Room beneath the West Wing of the White House is the nerve center where American presidents receive the most sensitive intelligence briefings and make decisions affecting global security, and no journalist has ever been granted unrestricted access to the space under any administration in its entire operational history. Senior White House staff members who work in the building daily are escorted at all times when entering the Situation Room complex and must surrender every personal electronic device before the door opens. The room was famously photographed during the Osama bin Laden raid in 2011, but that image showed the people inside, not the room itself. 79. Project MKUltra was the CIA's covert mind control research program running through the 1950s and 1960s, during which agency operatives dosed unwitting American and Canadian civilians with LSD and other psychoactive substances without consent to study the effects on human behavior and determine whether chemicals could be used to extract information or control individuals. CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the majority of MKUltra records destroyed in 1973 when the program faced exposure. 20,000 documents survived only because they had been misfiled in a financial records building nobody thought to check. Some subjects who were dosed without knowledge never fully mentally recovered. 80. Berkeley Pit. In Butte, Montana is a former open-pit copper mine that filled with millions of gallons of extremely acidic water, so contaminated with dissolved heavy metals, including arsenic, copper, and sulfuric acid, that its pH sits around 2.5, which is roughly the acidity of cola, but with the addition of substances that dissolve living tissue. In November 1995, a migrating flock of 342 snow geese landed on the water during a storm seeking shelter, and every single bird was dead by morning. The pit remains open today, and the water level rises by approximately 14 million gallons annually. 81. The Mormon endowment ceremony is a sacred ritual performed inside Latter-day Saint temples that has historically been conducted under strict secrecy oaths taken by participating members who promise never to describe or discuss the ceremony's contents with anyone outside the temple under any circumstances. In 1990, the ceremony contained a specific penalty clause that required members to mime slitting their own throat as a symbolic gesture representing the consequences of breaking their oath. That clause was quietly removed after someone secretly filmed portions of the ceremony and released the footage publicly. The church made the change without any official public announcement or explanation. 82. Tristan da Cunha is a British overseas territory sitting in the South Atlantic Ocean 1,750 miles from the nearest landmass, making it the most remote, permanently inhabited island on the entire planet. The island's small population of around 250 people evacuated completely in 1961 after a volcano on the island erupted and threatened to destroy the settlement entirely. They were transported to England, where they lived for 2 years before holding a vote among themselves on whether to return to their extraordinarily isolated island home. The majority voted yes, and they sailed back to Tristan da Cunha. 83. The NSA maintains a public national cryptologic museum outside its headquarters in Fort Meade, Maryland, that displays artifacts and tells the history of American signals intelligence in a way that is educational and carefully curated. What the museum does not mention is that it represents approximately 10% of the actual archive held behind it. The remaining 90% contains active code-breaking methodologies, classified intercept techniques, and intelligence-gathering tools that the NSA considers current operational secrets, despite some of them dating back decades. The public gets the interesting-looking historical display cases. Everything that actually matters stays locked behind the real walls. 84. Nevada Test Site's Sedan crater was created on July 6, 1962, when the United States government detonated a thermonuclear device 135 meters underground as part of Operation Plowshare, a program genuinely attempting to determine whether nuclear bombs could be used as peaceful construction tools to excavate harbors, canals, and mining sites. The explosion displaced 12 million tons of earth and created a crater 600 feet deep and nearly a quarter-mile wide, which became the largest human-made crater in American history. The Atomic Energy Commission considered it a partial success. The idea of using nuclear bombs to dig canals was eventually abandoned. 85. Galapagos Islands restricted zones on Isabella Island have been sealed to all unauthorized human entry since the 1970s, after scientists accidentally introduced invasive species, including feral goats and rats, to islands where native species had evolved for millions of years, with zero land predators and therefore had no behavioral defenses against them. Bird populations that existed nowhere else on Earth were nearly wiped out entirely before emergency eradication programs could be implemented at enormous cost. The restricted zones were established to give recovering populations protected space, and scientists today treat preventing any further accidental introduction as an absolute non-negotiable priority. 86. CIA's GLOMAR. Explorer program produced one of the most audacious cover stories in American intelligence history when the agency worked with Howard Hughes to publicly present a deep sea mining vessel as a commercial project while secretly using it to attempt raising a sunken Soviet nuclear submarine from 16,500 feet below the Pacific Ocean surface. The operation partially succeeded in 1974, recovering a portion of the submarine along with Soviet codebooks and the bodies of several crew members who were given a burial at sea filmed by the CIA. The entire operation remained completely hidden from public knowledge for 30 years. 87. Sverdlovsk. Underground command post in Russia is a city-sized bunker system constructed beneath the city now called Yekaterinburg during the Cold War at a scale large enough to house the entire Soviet government apparatus and continue operating as a functioning command center even after a full-scale nuclear exchange had destroyed the surface above it. Western intelligence analysts who studied available evidence estimated the complex extended across an area comparable to a small city underground, with its own power generation, water supply, and communication infrastructure entirely independent of surface systems. Its full dimensions and current operational status remain classified by the Russian government. 88. Giant crystal cave beneath the Naka mine in Chihuahua. Mexico contains selenite crystals growing up to 36 feet long and 4 feet wide, making them the largest natural crystals ever discovered on Earth, and they formed over 500,000 years in a flooded cave chamber that maintained a constant temperature of 136 degrees Fahrenheit. A human being entering without a specially designed cooling suit loses consciousness from heat exhaustion within approximately 10 minutes and dies shortly after. Scientists developed ice-filled suits allowing visits of up to 45 minutes. The mine pumps were turned off in 2015, flooding the cave again and ending all access permanently. 89. Tomb of Qin Shi Huang in China contains the burial complex of China's first emperor who died in 210 BC and was interred with an army of 8,000 terracotta warriors. Rivers of liquid mercury engineered to flow through channels beneath the burial mound, representing China's waterways and treasures accumulated during his reign, unifying the country. The terracotta warriors in the outer pits have been excavated and are among the most visited archaeological sites on Earth. The inner tomb itself has never been opened. Chinese authorities say advanced ground-penetrating radar confirms the mercury rivers are still liquid beneath the soil, and they have no plans to open it for decades. 90. Jan Mayen Island is a remote Norwegian volcanic island in the Arctic Ocean, staffed year-round by a rotating crew of exactly 18 Norwegian meteorologists, whose job is to operate a weather monitoring station in one of the most isolated and inhospitable postings available to any government employee anywhere on the planet. The island has an active volcano, extreme weather conditions, and essentially nothing else. No civilian has ever been permitted to stay overnight on Jan Mayen under any circumstance in the island's documented history. The meteorologists serve their rotation and leave. The next 18 arrive. The volcano does whatever it wants regardless. 91. Nevada Device. Assembly facility is where the United States physically assembles live nuclear warhead components today as an active ongoing operation, and it maintains the highest security classification of any facility in the American nuclear weapons complex. Even sitting members of the United States Congress, who technically oversee the entire federal government budget that funds this facility, must obtain specific individual presidential clearance before being permitted anywhere near the entrance. The facility's location is known, its general purpose is acknowledged, and essentially every other detail about its internal operations remains completely off-limits to everyone outside an extremely small cleared circle. 92. Mayak Production Association in Russia's Ural region was the site of the 1957 Kyshtym nuclear disaster, which released radioactive contamination across hundreds of square miles of surrounding countryside in an explosion caused by a failed cooling system in a nuclear waste storage tank. It ranks as the third worst nuclear accident in recorded history, behind only Chernobyl and Fukushima. The Soviet Union kept the entire event completely secret from its own population and the outside world for 30 years. Villages within the contamination zone were never fully evacuated. Residents continued living, farming, and drinking contaminated water for years without being told anything was wrong. 93. Mount Erebus in Antarctica is an active volcano that has been continuously erupting for decades, and beneath its ice-covered slopes exists a network of volcanic caves warmed by geothermal heat, where microbial life has been living in complete isolation from every organism on the surface since the Antarctic ice sheet formed millions of years ago. Scientists who discovered these cave ecosystems found organisms that had been evolving in total separation from all surface life for so long they represent an entirely independent branch of microbial development. The caves are extraordinarily difficult to access, and most of the network has never been explored by any human being. 94. Raven Rock Mountain Complex in Pennsylvania is officially known as Site R and serves as the military's alternate underground Pentagon, carved inside a mountain, with its own internal subway system connecting different sections, dormitory facilities capable of housing hundreds of personnel, independent power generation, and a completely self-contained infrastructure designed to allow full military command operations to continue indefinitely after a nuclear strike destroys Washington, D.C. above ground. Vice President Dick Cheney was taken here on September 11, 2001, and operated from inside the mountain for a period while the situation in New York and Washington was still unfolding. 95. Operation Paperclip was the classified American program that secretly recruited and imported over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technical specialists from Nazi Germany immediately after World War II ended, providing them with new identities, employment contracts, and protection from war crimes prosecution in exchange for their technical expertise in rocketry, aviation, and weapons development. Some of these scientists had directly overseen experiments conducted on concentration camp prisoners using human subjects without consent. Their wartime records were classified, sanitized, or simply ignored. Several went on to become celebrated figures in the American space program, whose public biographies omitted their wartime activities entirely. 96. Ethiopian Danakil Depression sits at the intersection of three tectonic plates pulling apart from each other and holds the distinction of being simultaneously the lowest, hottest, and geologically most active land surface on Earth, where temperatures exceed 145 degrees. Acid pools maintain a pH close to 0, making them among the most corrosive liquids found anywhere in nature, and a continuously active lava lake called Erta Ale has been erupting without interruption for thousands of years. Scientists study it wearing full protective equipment and strictly limit surface time. It looks exactly like what every science fiction writer imagined another planet would look like. 97. Oracle of Delphi in ancient Greece operated from a chamber called the Adyton, where the Pythia, a specially selected priestess, would sit above a crack in the rock and deliver prophecies that guided the decisions of kings, generals, and city-states across the ancient Mediterranean world. For centuries, historians treated the divine visions as mythology until geological excavations confirmed that the rock fissures beneath the temple site release ethylene gas, a sweet-smelling hydrocarbon that at certain concentrations produces euphoria, dissociation, and vivid hallucinations in humans. The most powerful oracle in the ancient world was essentially hotboxing herself on natural gas, and everybody took her completely seriously. 98. Clipperton Island is a tiny French-owned ring-shaped atoll in the Pacific Ocean, so completely isolated that in 1906, a small Mexican military garrison was stationed there to assert territorial claims and then essentially forgotten by the Mexican government when the revolution began consuming all available attention and resources. Supply ships stopped coming. The men ran out of food. They died one by one over years until a single man named Victoriano Alvarez remained and declared himself king of the island. He proceeded to terrorize the surviving women until one of them killed him with a hammer in 1917. A passing American ship rescued the survivors shortly after. 99. Kapustin Yar in southern Russia has been the Soviet Union and later Russia's primary missile and rocket testing facility since 1947, making it one of the longest continuously operating military test ranges on Earth. Over its decades of operation, the facility witnessed more than 11 atmospheric nuclear weapons tests that were never officially acknowledged in any Soviet public record, and whose documentation did not become available to outside researchers until leaked materials surfaced in 1994. Western intelligence agencies monitored the site throughout the Cold War and accumulated substantial evidence of programs the Soviet government maintained in complete official silence for the entirety of their operation. 100. Area 13. Within the Nevada test site is a classified subzone where American scientists conducted a series of experiments between the 1950s and 1960s, specifically designed to determine what would happen if a nuclear weapon caught fire or was involved in a conventional explosion without triggering a nuclear detonation. The experiments deliberately scattered plutonium across the test area to measure dispersal patterns. The exact GPS coordinates of every contaminated soil patch created during these safety experiments remain classified to this day, meaning cleanup workers, geologists, and anyone else working elsewhere on the test site cannot know precisely where the plutonium contamination is actually located underground. 101. Murray Island Coral Cave Systems. Off the coast of Australia contain populations of fish whose ancestors swam into the caves during the last ice age approximately 10,000 years ago, when sea levels and coastal geography were dramatically different from today. Once trapped inside the completely dark cave environment, those fish populations evolved in total isolation across hundreds of generations, adapting to permanent darkness by losing pigmentation entirely and developing eyes that grew progressively smaller and less functional with each generation until the current population possesses eyes that are completely non-functional and essentially decorative. 10,000 years of darkness made sight completely irrelevant to their survival. 102. The E-4B Nightwatch aircraft is a specially modified Boeing 747 operated by the United States Air Force and known unofficially as the Doomsday Plane because it carries full nuclear launch authority and command capability and is kept continuously airborne somewhere over American territory at all times as an airborne backup command center in case ground-based command facilities are destroyed in a first-strike nuclear attack. The aircraft lands only long enough to refuel and rotate crews before returning immediately to the air. Multiple aircraft rotate through this mission continuously. At any given moment, right now, one of them is up there somewhere carrying the ability to end civilization. 103. The Voynich manuscript is a handwritten illustrated book, carbon dated to the early 15th century, written entirely in an alphabet and language that no linguist, codebreaker, or computational analysis system has successfully deciphered in over 600 years of examination. The book contains detailed illustrations of unidentifiable plants, astronomical diagrams, and what appear to be bathing women connected by pipe systems, none of which correspond to any known text, botanical record, or cultural tradition. The NSA formally studied it using classified code-breaking resources. Every major cryptological institution on Earth has attempted it. The manuscript sits in Yale's Beinecke Library completely unread and completely unexplained. 104. Wakhan Corridor is a narrow strip of Afghan territory stretching east to connect Afghanistan with China that was drawn deliberately by British and Russian imperial mapmakers in the 19th century as a buffer zone between their competing empires and has remained one of the least mapped and least governed pieces of land on Earth ever since. Villages deep inside the corridor have had no meaningful contact with any central government for decades, and some communities have operated in complete administrative isolation through the Soviet invasion, the Taliban era, and everything that followed. Large sections of the corridor interior have never been mapped at ground level by any surveying expedition. 105. Yazidi Lalish Temple in northern Iraq is the holiest site of the Yazidi religion, an ancient faith so secretive in its inner practices that adherents are forbidden from writing the name of God in any form, and the religion's most sacred texts have never been committed to writing at all, existing only in oral tradition passed between initiated members. The innermost sanctuary of the temple has been entered by outsiders on extremely rare occasions, but none has ever published a description of what the interior contains or what occurs there. The Yazidi people have faced repeated genocidal persecution, specifically because of widespread misunderstanding of their secretive religious practices. 106. Gruinard Island off the northwest coast of Scotland was used by British military scientists in 1942 to test anthrax bombs dropped from aircraft onto sheep, herded onto the island, to determine whether weaponized anthrax could be effectively deployed against enemy populations during World War II. The experiment worked extremely well in the worst possible sense. The island became so thoroughly contaminated with anthrax spores that it was placed under strict quarantine and remained officially off-limits to the public for 48 years. A decontamination effort in 1986 using formaldehyde solution was partially successful, and the island was officially declared safe in 1990, though scientists remain privately cautious about that assessment. 107. Ramstein Air Base in Germany houses the Combined Air Operations Center, which serves as the command and coordination hub for every American military drone strike conducted across Africa and the Middle East in real-time processing targeting information, coordinating with satellite systems, and authorizing lethal strikes affecting multiple active conflict zones simultaneously from inside a building on German soil. The existence of this function at Ramstein became publicly known through investigative journalism and leaked documents. 0 journalists have ever been permitted inside the operations center itself. The German government has faced significant domestic political pressure regarding the facility's role in lethal drone operations conducted from their territory. 108. Project Plowshare's gas buggy experiment in New Mexico on December 10, 1967, involved the United States government detonating a 29-kiloton nuclear bomb 4,200 feet underground in a natural gas-bearing rock formation, specifically to test whether nuclear explosions could fracture rock and release trapped natural gas deposits more efficiently than conventional drilling methods. The explosion did fracture the rock and did release natural gas. The gas was also measurably radioactive from the detonation and therefore completely unusable for commercial distribution. The full technical results of the experiment were never published, and the underground cavity created by the explosion remains radioactive today. 109. Louisiana Bayou contains pre-Columbian earthwork mounds built by Native American civilizations that predate European contact with North America by centuries, and potentially hold archaeological evidence that could significantly reshape current understanding of how complex organized societies developed across the North American continent before colonization. Archaeologists know these mounds exist and have identified their general locations, but cannot excavate them, because the majority sit on private land whose owners have not granted research access. The mounds sit under swamp water and encroaching vegetation slowly deteriorating, while the historical knowledge preserved inside them becomes incrementally harder to recover with each passing year. 110. Bhangar Fort in Rajasthan, India, is a remarkably well-preserved ruins complex dating to the 17th century that attracts tourists from across the country who come specifically because of its documented reputation as the most haunted location in India. The Archaeological Survey of India has placed official government signage at the entrance formally prohibiting entry after sunset and before sunrise. This is the only site in the entire country where the Indian government has issued what amounts to an official supernatural hazard warning on a public sign. The stated reason involves a curse placed by a holy man. The government put it on a sign. India is a country of 1.4 billion people. 111. Oak Island off the coast of Nova Scotia, Canada, has been the site of an obsessive treasure hunting operation stretching back to 1795, when teenagers discovered a circular depression in the ground that seemed to conceal an engineered shaft going straight down. Excavations over 2 centuries have revealed layers of logs, coconut fiber, and apparent flood tunnels designed as booby traps that fill the pit with seawater whenever diggers get close to the bottom. 6 people have died during excavation attempts. Millions of dollars have been spent. The bottom of the shaft has never been reached, and whatever was buried there, if anything at all, remains completely and perfectly unknown. And that was 111 places on Earth where humans are straight up not allowed, not welcome, or simply too smart to try visiting. If your brain is completely fried right now, you are absolutely not alone. Drop a comment below telling us which one scared you the most, because we are genuinely curious what broke you first. If you learned something today that you immediately wish you could unlearn, hit that like button and subscribe to Dumb History, because we do this every single week, and it only gets weirder from here.